Design is really finding the right question so that the answer that you propose is right. I mean, if you propose answers without knowing the question, you have a pretty good chance of being wrong.
Welcome to the Community Center for Marengo Urbanism, a show about bringing people together by creating sustainable, diverse, and resilient spaces. I'm Kyler. I'll be your host for today. I'm an architect and design communicator based out of Oklahoma City. And today we are joined by a very special guest who will be helping us to answer the question, how can thoughtful architecture bring people together even when it feels like tremendous forces beyond our control are trying to push us apart? Carol Ross Barney, welcome to the show. Could you start us out by telling a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you, Kyler. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to meet you. I am also an architect. I have a practice in Chicago, and we do a whole lot of public space. In fact, some people may think that we don't really do architecture because we besides doing buildings, we do a lot of what holds cities together, parks, transit, basically urban infrastructure. But talking about Oklahoma City, we also did, and this is one of my favorite projects of all times because I learned so much. We also did the Oklahoma City Federal Building, which was built to replace the space that was lost when the Murrah Building was destroyed. And so I am somewhat familiar with Oklahoma City, and I'm fascinated by the town.
Excellent. Yeah. I want to go ahead and start off just by asking about early in your career, you enlisted in the Peace Corps and you were assigned to work in Costa Rica. So what surprised you about this experience and what lasting impact did this work have on you that you've taken throughout your work?
Well, I became an architect because I wanted to improve the world. I wanted to change the world. I thought that I am a boomer, and so high on the list was that if you were on the planet for a while, it was your obligation, your responsibility to right wrongs and make it better. And so that's why I became an architect, because I thought that making cities, making buildings definitely had that potential. And so when I finished architecture school, like a lot of times architects will identify with this, our profession is really tied strongly to an economic growth and recession. So when I graduated, there weren't a lot of jobs. And I am a graduate of the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I was walking through the Illini Union. There was a table with a sign for Peace Corps on it. And so I stopped to chat and I thought to myself, this is perfect. This is really, even though I was really looking for a job and not finding one, I thought I can do this. And so I signed up there, and it was really pretty funny because there was a spot on the application form that said, "Is there any place you really don't want to go?" And I put in Latin America, and sure enough, like maybe a week or two later, they called and said, "We think that you're a fit for Costa Rica." And it sounded like it was Latin America to me, but I was so young and I had so much to learn that I had to look it up to see where Costa Rica is. And actually, if you don't know, I can tell you now because I lived there then for 2 years. It's on the isthmus, immediately north of Panama. Yes, and just south of Guatemala. So it's definitely Latin. But when I got there, my actual job in the Peace Corps was to support a program that was building national parks. And the reason it was important, and it remains important, is Costa Rica, basically the isthmus in general, is one of the most diverse ecologies in the world. That's due to the fact that it is a Pacific flyway. So you can imagine how many different bird and animal species go through this little piece of land that tie north to south. In fact, there are more bird species that pass through Costa Rica than all of the United States. And so it was a good job. It was a great challenge because I learned two things. One was that I had gone to school and I had learned about human ecologies for sure, from the idea that you program your community's needs, and then the design is derived from that. And so what I learned is that not only is the planet occupied by human ecologies, but we are inexorably and intimately linked with all the ecologies of the planet, all the systems. It would become stunningly obvious when you're trying to build housing on a volcano, worker housing on a volcano. Power of the environment was so immense. So that was one thing that was really super for me. That was the most important lesson I could have had coming out of architecture school. The second lesson I learned is, okay, here's all these different things. I know nothing about them. But fortunately, in my Peace Corps group, I was the only architect. There was a landscape architect and a park planner. but we were the only design professionals. Everybody else were the people who knew, had all this vital information, botanists, biologists. I had all kinds of support. And what it really taught me was the value, actually the necessity of an interdisciplinary team. And I think that for me, that's a super important lesson for young architects is you don't have to know everything. In fact, realize that you don't and get on the team.
Hmm.
So that's a long explanation of what I learned in the Peace Corps. It was a very, for me, it was life changing
Incredible.
and really timely because right now our practice does still concentrates on that balance between between nature and the built environment.
Yeah, for sure. You already mentioned the OKC Federal Building, and this is actually initially why I reached out to you. So you designed the replacement for the Murrah Federal Building after the tragic bombing back in 1995, and I wasn't around it yet in 1995, so it's a bit a bit challenging for me to kind of understand what that must have been like. But last Friday, I found myself down in Sulphur, Oklahoma, which is a town that was recently impacted by a major tornado. And so standing in that wreckage, I kind of felt that the idea of rebuilding anything is this kind of overwhelmingly challenging task. So with that new perspective, I want to ask you both specifically about the OKC Federal Building, some of the challenges that you faced there, and then also more broadly, your thoughts on resiliency and how to think about rebuilding efforts after the aftermath of any kind of disaster.
I think those are really good topics. Okay, I actually do remember Oklahoma City pretty vividly because I think that there in the 90s there was. I mean, when you look at the history of our country, even going through, two great wars in one century, we were really untouched. Like there's no immense act of violence that was remembered by the American people. It's interesting. I just spent last summer, I spent a couple weeks in Japan. And I was impressed that all the Japanese cities are new. And I was impressed that we never knew the level of destruction that these countries did after terrible events like that. But in any case, if you were living in the States in the 90s, this is an unthinkable event. Nothing had happened like this. And so it was tragic just by the number of people that lost their lives. But beyond that, it was a national event that it changed the way Americans thought about their safety and their security. And so the design was a challenge. One of the things that was interesting about it is at that point in time, GSA was not replacing any office space. They had decided a few administrations before that they were going to rent office space on the open market, more what our government should do. But in any case, and so GSA didn't have any money to build or replace office buildings, and their budget was already set. But this was so important to the Congress and to the American people. The Congress made a special appropriation to rebuild the space that was lost in Oklahoma City. Part of it, big part of it, was the idea that we're not going to leave. I mean, we're going to stand by and defend our idea of government, our open government. And so that was probably the most powerful idea that was part of the programming for this replacement building. In fact, GSA put the project in their design excellence program and sent it out for proposals. And we it's really funny, we had never done a building outside of Illinois, outside of Chicago right then. And we decided though that this project was important to us because we'd been working on inner city schools. And it seemed to us with our experience at inner city schools that, yeah, these were places that needed security. They needed to feel like they were, in a bad way, armored, in a good way, secure. They had to feel like sanctuary. And on the other hand, they had to be welcoming and opening. So if you're building a school, it has to invite every kid in. These are public schools. And for a lot of populations, they're the future for their families and for the communities. So what we did, what we told the GSA in our interview, I remember it distinctly, is we thought schools were like the challenge that was here in Oklahoma City, that what we needed to do was create a building or create an environment that felt safe and protected, but was open and really welcoming. And so that became our objective for the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And it turned out to be, it really was a big challenge. What we didn't know then, but we learned, in fact, nobody knew it then, was how to design for security. I still am pretty cynical about designing for security because, what happened in Oklahoma was, it was just a couple of guys in the end. It wasn't like, a foreign power or anything like that. It was a couple of guys, dissidents, and they rented a U-Haul truck, and they put fertilizer and racing car fuel in the truck, and they blew it up in front of the building. And the tragedy, interestingly enough, was magnified because they parked the truck right at a column that was supporting a transfer beam that went all the way across the building. There was an auditorium underneath this beam, and so it needed a long span. And since nobody ever thought that anyone would remove one column from a building, they didn't consider the reality that if you remove that column, the whole building would collapse. That's usually not true in a building. If you think about it, they're multidimensional. If you remove one column in most buildings, it would stay there. Yeah, if you remove one wall from your house, it'll stay there for a while. It won't be terribly stable, but it won't collapse. But there are key structural elements that you can't do without. And because this building was not built with that consideration, there's no redundancy at all. So that one sort of unbelievably inopportune coincidence caused the entire building to collapse. And people who died in the bombing it wasn't the blast, but it was the collapse of the building that would really turn fatal. That, and the other thing that turned out to be very deadly was if you were in downtown Oklahoma City in that day, every building within, I think it was a half mile, lost glass. It was just all the glass was blown out under the blast pressure. And the flying glass also created a really hazardous and injury-causing environment. So to make the building safe, it actually got scientific at that point, where we'd have to spend all this time figuring out how do you make a building that has a structure, if you remove these members, it doesn't collapse. And how do you glaze a building so that you don't have shattered glass flying throughout it? The reason I'm cynical about it, though, is because, you can always find some bad thing to do to a building. And I think that the idea of openness was much more important for Oklahoma City. So when I look at that building, I'm actually pretty pleased because it does feel open and it doesn't feel, I can tell you what parts of it, what we did to it so that it doesn't behave the way the Murrah building did. But on the other hand, I think that sort of triage, it's not really very important. It's where you're going to measure the skid. And there's some clever technologies in the building that were developed strictly as security design. But the best part is that it's open government. Basically, the building has these arms that welcome you in. And it says that we believe in open government, even under duress, even under attack. We believe in open government. So that was the important lesson for me from Oklahoma City. The other thing, though, this is an aside totally. Oklahoma City was another sort of like, aha, eureka, this I understand thing moment in my career. Because, I am a Chicagoan. I practice in Chicago. I went to school in Illinois. When I got a commission early in my career, I said to myself, I know everything about Chicago. I've been here for my entire life. What do I need to know? I am Chicago. When I got to Oklahoma, after we got the commission, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know anything about this place. So I took off 2 weeks and I traveled all over Oklahoma and into Northwest Arkansas too, because some of the architectural traditions are really, everything in Northwest Arkansas, Fay Jones and Frank Lloyd Wright, all that stuff was super interesting to me that, there was this really avant-garde architectural tradition. Anyway, so I spent 2 weeks trying to find out everything that I could about Oklahoma, is to make up for my lack of knowledge. After the end of that time, I know so much. I was a terrible wonk. I knew all this stuff. Statehood was this date, population was this, but I was still missing a big piece. And that was a real understanding of what people were thinking and what the community wanted for this project, for this building. Fortunately for me, it didn't seem like fortunate at the time. As soon as we were hired to do the building, the people who were moving back in, by the way, were all the agencies that were the building the day it was attacked, minus law enforcement. They decided to take law enforcement out because it was too dangerous. But a lot of the agencies that were there, housing and urban development was one of the major tenants, and they had the biggest loss of life. They weren't interested in moving back to that site. They didn't want to be there. One thing is it was bad memories. And the second thing, it's hard to park in downtown Oklahoma City compared to the places they had parked them out and basically in the rural surrounds, the strip centers of Oklahoma City. And so while the administrators were signed up to move back into our building, the employees said, this isn't our thing. We don't want to move back in. So Ed Feiner, who was chief architect for GSA, then set up a really good program to engage those communities in conversation. And he did it as additional services, like this was extra. And I thought it was so insightful because it gave us the other piece of what I didn't have as a designer to do the building. I had to know what people were thinking. And so that was the first engagement we ever did. We did a lot of things wrong. I'll give you an example. We did a questionnaire for the federal employees that would be moving back in. Downtown merchants, we talked to the city government, we talked to all kinds of people. It was pretty expansive. But when we were talking to the staff, federal employees that were moving back in, we decided we'd give them a questionnaire, and we had never written one before. We asked them, what's the most important thing that this building needs to accomplish? And the top answer was no parking near the building, which made a lot of sense because it happened because somebody could park right in front of the building. And then so that was the number one desire. The second most desirable thing was close-in parking. And we thought, wait a minute, did we ask a bad question? Did we ruin our survey? No, actually, those were both really important ideas. And that's sort of like one example, but it shows how nested and how sometimes how complicated and maybe even contradictory that requirements for design could be. I learned a lot at Oklahoma City, and like I said, it was very important. So today, one of the services that we like to provide to our clients is engagement, where we will have a chance to talk to people, find out what they need, what they want.
Yeah. So to take that a step further, and on a little bit of a lighter note, you've designed a lot of impactful public spaces throughout Chicago, including the Chicago Riverwalk expansion, many CTA stations and transit-related projects, and a multimodal terminal at the Chicago O'Hare Airport. What to you is the importance of public architecture, and how do you typically approach the design of these public spaces?
Well, the spaces that you've talked about, I think are important. They're not things that you would expect to be architectural monuments. There's not one art museum that you said, oh, I think Carol designed, this museum. Or they're not necessarily the places where people expect design. But I would argue that design is actually one of the things that makes a quantitative and qualitative difference to environment and consequently to the quality of your everyday life. So the buildings that you encounter, the buildings and the systems that you encounter the most are probably the ones that need design the most. And that does include exactly the types of buildings that you just cited from our portfolio. It does include public parks. The Riverwalk is essentially a mile and a half long city park along the river that's only like 40 feet wide. I mean, it's sort of a glorified sidewalk in a lot of ways, but it's really important to the quality of life. And yes, it does need design, and it's not something that you add on later. It's not. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to some potential client or agency. They say, well, this project it's just a run-of-the-mill project. It doesn't need design. Design is a superpower. Everything needs design because it makes it that much better. And it doesn't really cost any money. I may have that argument from time to time with owners, but it's not, I can quantify what you need to charge someone for design, and it's not much. They'll never miss it. So I think that is the thing that we start out with when we work on those projects. And it goes beyond that. I mean, design is really finding the right question so that the answer that you propose is right. I mean, if you propose answers without knowing the question, you have a pretty good chance of being wrong. And so it's our belief, it's our philosophy that design is it's a verb, often a verb, occasionally a noun, but very often a verb. And it extends to all kinds of problems. We just finished a project for the USDA, the National Forest Service. And the project doesn't sound like architecture at all. What they came to us because we had done some work for them and they liked the way we thought, and they were having a problem. There are so many forest fires now in the national forests that they were having trouble growing enough little trees in their nursery to replace what was burning. And so what they wanted us to do is the same way we had systematically looked at their site plans, at their master plans. They wanted us to look at their whole system for the whole country and help them figure out how to grow more trees so they could meet this need. Is that architecture? Maybe not architecture, but it certainly is design. And it takes the same type of consideration. Like, what is the real question here? And what are my ways that I can possibly answer it? So that's what we believe when we start public spaces. And we think, I think it's immensely important because the other things that it feeds into is like, if you do this right, if you as a city bother to find out the right question and work diligently for an innovative answer, you'll make your city more resilient. You'll make it more sustainable.
Yeah, for sure. That idea that design is always important is, one worth telling people about. When you were starting out, architecture was definitely a male-dominated industry, and it can still be an uphill battle to this day to be a part of an underrepresented group in architecture or in any industry, really. That is to say, throughout your career, you've kind of had to be a trailblazer and an advocate for yourself and for others. In what ways have you built solidarity with others? How have you seen these efforts pay off? And what words of encouragement would you give to those who might feel like they're alone in their field of study, workplace, or some other kind of community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. At my class from the University of Illinois, there were 100 in my class. There were 3 women. Fortunately, that's changed a lot. I've been teaching at Illinois Institute of Technology for, I think, 35 years now. And I can report that my classes are at least half women, sometimes more. So in some ways, change has occurred and continues to occur. And quite honestly, architecture is not a skill or a vocation that has to do with your gender or your ethnic origins. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with empathy. It has to do with creativity. And there's no reason why you should be discouraged by who you are, except that sometimes it's really hard because of the barriers that are in our society. The good news is they're changing. The bad news is that there's still change to be made. So I do have, since I am a teacher, I get this question, and I can't tell anybody that they're going to overcome it. That the prejudices don't exist anymore. But I can tell them that all of us are part of the answer. Like, yeah, I did my part. I bumped the ceiling up a little bit, but it's not Carol doing it. It's Carol and all the other people who have the vocation, the gift, the will to make change in their communities, maybe by being an architect. So and I think we have to connect with each other too. Like, I do agree that by saying that, if someone had said that to me, I would have welcomed it, and it would have been important. It was important to me. I had several mentors. I was lucky to have some mentors, but that's my responsibility, and that'll be your responsibility. Maybe it probably is your responsibility now. It's just that, to a different audience. And there's still a lot to do. What can I say?
Yeah, for sure. Carol, I want to give you a big thank you for joining me today. It's really been an honor to have you on the show. And last thing before we go, is there anywhere you'd like to direct people who are interested in finding out more about your work?
About my work? Just, well, first of all, if you're in Oklahoma City, you go look at the federal building. We like it a lot. But look at our website. Pay attention to architecture. Someone told me something really interesting that I had never thought about it before. They said, we are so concerned with what we put in our bodies, to be healthy people. We should be equally concerned about where we put our bodies to be healthy people. So, pay attention to your environment. But you can look up our work. We're really proud of it. It's r-varc.com. And if you want to write a comment, let me know what you think.
Sweet. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, Kyler, you asked great questions, and I've really enjoyed our talk.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, it's me, Kyler. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to give the show a like, rating, subscription, or whatever kind of nice feedback you can provide on whatever platform you're watching or listening from. If you'd like to join our community to stay up to date or to discuss anything you heard in today's show, consider joining the Oringo Urbanism Discord server. And finally, if you'd like to support the work of Oringo Urbanism directly, you can do so over on Patreon. Until next time.